Tithe. Have you ever been humiliated by someone who was supposed to protect you? I mean truly humiliated, not just embarrassed, but stripped of something you can never quite get back. That moment when someone with power looks at you and decides, right there in front of everyone, that you are less, that you will always be less, that, no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you will never be anything more than what they see when they look at you with that particular kind of contempt. I was standing in a courtroom in Columbus, Ohio. It was August 2017. The air conditioning was broken, and I could feel sweat running down my spine beneath the orange jumpsuit. My hands were cuffed in front of me, and I remember the weight of those metal bracelets, how they pulled my shoulders forward, made me smaller. There were maybe 30 people in that room. My mother was there, crying quietly in the third row. My public defender, a tired man with coffee stains on his tie, was shuffling papers. And at the bench, elevated above us all like some kind of minor god, was Judge Richard Coleman, too. He didn't look at me when he spoke. He looked at his papers, at his clerk, at the ceiling. Anywhere but at me. "Miss Martinez," he said, and his voice had that particular flatness that people use when they've already decided everything about you. "This is your fourth appearance before this court in 6 years. Fourth. Possession, petty theft, probation violation, and now possession with intent. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" I opened my mouth. I wanted to tell him about the baby I'd lost, about the man who'd put his hands around my throat, about the prescription that became something else, something darker. When the doctor stopped writing it and the pain didn't stop, I wanted to tell him I was trying. That I'd been clean for 43 days. That I'd found a job at a laundromat. Minimum wage, but it was something. It was honest. But before I could speak, he continued, "Actually, don't bother." He leaned back in his chair, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not quite disgust. Something colder. Indifference. "I've read your file, Miss Martinez. I've heard every excuse, every promise, every tearful statement about how this time will be different. And I'm going to tell you something I wish someone had told you years ago. People like you don't change. You come from chaos, you create chaos, and you return to chaos. It's a cycle as predictable as the seasons. This court has given you chance after chance, and you have squandered every single one. The truth is, I don't believe you can change. I don't believe you will change. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise." The room went very quiet. He sentenced me to 18 months. Minimum security, with treatment requirements. It could have been worse. It should have felt like mercy. But all I could hear, over and over, like a record skipping, was that voice. "People like you don't change." That was 7 years ago, but before I tell you why that moment changed everything, why his words became the thing that both broke me and rebuilt me, let me take you back. Because you can't understand the woman at the funeral without understanding the girl in the trailer park. I grew up in Whitehall, on the east side of Columbus. Our trailer sat at the end of a gravel road, pale blue with rust eating through the bottom panels. Bills. In the summer, the metal walls would heat up like an oven, and in the winter, no matter how high we turned, the space heater, you could see your breath in the bedroom. I shared with my 2 younger sisters. My father left when I was 5, just didn't come home from work one day, and we never heard from him again. My mother worked 2 jobs, cashier at Kroger during the day, cleaning offices at night. I can still see her hands, red and cracked from the chemicals, moving constantly even when she was resting, like they'd forgotten how to be still. I learned early that the world was divided into people who had choices and people who didn't. We were the people who didn't. When the electricity got shut off, we used candles. When we couldn't afford candles, we sat in the dark. When my sister got sick, really sick, with fever that made her shake, my mother had to choose between taking her to the emergency room and losing a day's pay. We went to the ER. We ate ramen for a month, but I was smart. Everyone said so. Teachers would pull my mother aside at conferences and say things like, "She's gifted, and she could really be something." I tested into the advanced classes. I got straight A's without trying. There was this one teacher, Mrs. Henderson, who used to let me stay after school in her classroom, just reading. She kept books there that were in our trailer, thick books with cloth covers and gold lettering. I read everything. Fiction, history, poetry. For a few hours each day, I could be somewhere else. Someone else, ours. Going to be the one who got out? That's what everyone said. I was going to go to college, get scholarships, become a lawyer or a teacher or something important. Something that mattered. And then I turned 16 and I met Danny Reeves at a party in someone's backyard, and he had these green eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. 6 months later, I was pregnant. 6 months after that, I was married. Mrs. Henderson cried when I told her I was dropping out. The thing about being young and in love and poor is that you think love is enough. You think, we'll figure it out, we'll work hard, we'll be different, we'll beat the odds. And for a while, maybe you do. Danny got a job at the auto parts factory. I got my GED, worked at a call center. We had a tiny apartment, second floor where the carpet was stained, and the neighbors fought at 3 in the morning, but it was ours. And when Alina was born, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with a full head of black hair, I thought, this is it. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what matters. Have you ever felt something like this? That moment when you think you've finally found your place in the world, and everything else falls away. But nothing gold can stay, right? Isn't that what they say? Danny started drinking more. First it was just weekends, then it was every night, then it was mornings too. The fight started. Nothing physical at first, just words. But words can cut deeper than fists sometimes. And then one night, when Alina was 2 years old, he didn't come home. I found out later he'd been arrested for DUI. 3rd offense. He went away for 2 years. I tried. God, I tried to. Jobs, daycare I couldn't afford, bills stacking up like a house of cards. I hurt. That's the thing nobody tells you about being poor and stressed and exhausted. You hurt. Your back hurts from standing all day. Your head hurts from not sleeping. Your heart hurts from being so damn tired you can't even play with your daughter when you get home. When my wisdom teeth got infected and the clinic doctor wrote me a prescription for Vicodin, it didn't just stop the pain in my jaw, it stopped all of it. For the first time in years, I could breathe. You know what happens next, don't you? You've heard this story before. The prescription runs out. But the pain doesn't, and there's always someone who knows someone who can help. Before you know it, you're not the girl who was going to college. You're not even the mother who's trying. You're just another statistic, another file in another courtroom, another person who proves that people like us don't change. I lost Alina when she was 4. Child services came while I was at work, except I wasn't at work. I was passed out in someone's car. My neighbor had called because Alina was outside alone at midnight in December. They placed her with my mother. It was supposed to be temporary. It became permanent. I could see her supervised once a month. She would sit across from me in that sterile room with the social worker watching, and she would be so polite, so careful, like I was a stranger. Like I was someone dangerous. That was the worst part. Not the jail cells or the withdrawal or the judge's words. The worst part was watching my daughter forget that I was her mother, but that was only the beginning. In prison, and yes, after that sentencing in 2017, I went to prison. Something unexpected happened. They had this program, this treatment program, that was mandatory for people like me. Group therapy, individual counseling, classes on life skills and parenting and addiction. I didn't want to go. I sat in the back and didn't speak for the first 3 months. But there was this counselor, Dorothy, this black woman in her 60s with gray braids and hands that moved when she talked, and she wouldn't let me hide. Chew. You know what I see when I look at you? She said to me one day, after a group session where I'd said maybe 10 words, I see someone who's been told her whole life that she's not enough, not smart enough to matter, not good enough to keep, not strong enough to change. And I see someone who believed it. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't because she was right. So here's what we're going to do, she continued. We're going to stop talking about what you can't do and start talking about what you can. Small things, true things, things nobody can take away from you. It started so simply. I can wake up on time. I can make my bed. I can finish a book. I can help the woman in the next cell who can't read fill out her commissary form. I can write a letter to my daughter, even if I don't send it. I can do 1 push-up, then 5, then 20. I can take the GED prep class, even though I already have my GED. I can help other women study. I can take the community college course they offer through the PRISM program. Introduction to Psychology, I got an A, and then I can take another one. And another. Tone. Have you ever discovered that the person you thought you were isn't who you actually are? That underneath all the pain and the mistakes and the shame, there's someone else entirely. Someone who's been waiting. I served 14 months, got out early for good behavior and program completion. And when I walked out of that facility in October of 2018, I had 3 things: $27 in my pocket, an associate's degree in progress, and a plan. I was going to become a counselor. I was going to help people like me, and I was going to get my daughter back. The world doesn't make it easy for people with records. I applied for 63 jobs. 63. Most didn't call back. The ones that did would go well until they asked about the background check, and then suddenly the position was filled. I slept on my mother's couch. I went to meetings and meetings where people told their stories and I told mine, and we held each other up with nothing but words and weak coffee and the stubborn refusal to go back to what we'd been, volunteered, at the same place I'd done my court-ordered community service. A homeless shelter downtown, because even though they couldn't pay me, they let me help. And slowly, piece by piece, like building a house from matchsticks, I built a life. I got a job at a treatment center, working intake, minimum wage, overnight shifts. But I was helping people on their first day of recovery, and I knew what that day felt like. I kept taking classes, one at a time, online, and at the community college. Psychology, sociology, counseling techniques. My mother let me see Alina more often. Unsupervised visits. She was 8 years old and shy with me, but she liked it when I read to her. And sometimes she would fall asleep with her head on my shoulder, and I would sit perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to break the spell. I got a better job, at a non-profit that worked with women leaving incarceration. Then a better one, as a peer support specialist at a recovery center. I finished my bachelor's degree at 32 years old. I walked across the stage in a cap and gown, and my mother and Alina were there, and Alina held a sign that said, "That's my mum," and I cried so hard I couldn't see. I applied for graduate school. Social work I got in. I got a scholarship. I got a part-time position as a graduate assistant, working with at-risk youth. I was specializing in addiction and trauma. I was becoming the person who could have helped the girl I'd been. And that was the moment I stopped being who they thought I was. 3 years ago, I finished my master's degree. I got licensed. I got a job as a clinical social worker at a hospital, working in the emergency department with people in crisis, drug overdoses, suicide attempts, domestic violence, the people who came in at 3 in the morning with nowhere else to go, the people who needed someone to see them, really see them, not just the crisis but the person underneath. I was good at it. Really good, because I knew what it felt like to be on the other side of that bed. Alina came to live with me when she was 11. It wasn't easy. There was therapy, family therapy, conversations about trust and forgiveness and all the years we'd lost. But she's 15 now, and she calls me mum without hesitating, and she wants to be a therapist. And sometimes I look at her and think about how trauma can end with us, how we can be the ones who break the cycle. And I never thought about Judge Coleman. Not really. He was just part of the past, part of the story of who I'd been. Until 3 months ago, when I saw the obituary. Sarah Coleman, 23 years old, died by suicide. Opioid overdose. The daughter of Judge Richard Coleman and Martha Coleman. Services to be held at St. Timothy's Episcopal Church. I sat in my kitchen with the newspaper in my hands, and I felt something crack open in my chest. I knew about Sarah. Not personally, but professionally. She'd been in and out of treatment centers for 5 years. I'd never worked with her directly, but I'd seen her name in case consultations. Heard her story in the whispered conversations that happen among counselors when we're trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Wealthy family, good schools, everything she could want except the one thing she needed. Someone to see her pain as real, And now she was gone. I didn't plan to go to the funeral. What would be the point? But the night before the service, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that girl, that lost girl with everything and nothing. I kept thinking about Judge Coleman, and the way he'd looked at me, and the way he'd looked at everyone like me, like we were beyond saving. And I wondered if he'd looked at his daughter that way too. If she'd heard the same words I had, people like you don't change. So I went. The church was massive, all vaulted ceilings and stained glass that turned the light into something holy. It was packed. I sat in the back, wearing the only black dress I owned, and I watched as people filed in. Politicians, lawyers, people in expensive suits who'd come to pay respects to the judge, not to mourn the girl. The family sat in the front row. Judge Coleman looked smaller than I remembered, hunched in his pew, his wife beside him. They'd aged. We all had. The service was formal. Hymns and prayers and a eulogy from Sarah S. uncle that hit all the right notes without saying anything true. He talked about her smile, her kindness, her love of horses. Didn't mention the addiction. He didn't mention the 5 treatment centers. He didn't mention the way the system had failed her over and over, because even with money and connections, even with every advantage, we still do know how to save people from the thing that's killing them from the inside. And then the pastor asked if anyone else wanted to speak. I don't know what made me stand up. I didn't plan it. I didn't prepare anything. But I found myself walking down that long center aisle, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor, and people turned to look at me, this woman they didn't know, and I could feel Judge Coleman's eyes on me, and I climbed the steps to the podium. I looked out at all those faces. My name is Maria Martinez, I said, and my voice was steady. I didn't know Sarah, but I knew people like Sarah. I've worked with hundreds of them, and I am one of them. I could feel the shift in the room, the discomfort. 7 years ago, I stood in a courtroom, and Judge Coleman told me that people like me don't change. He said it was as predictable as the seasons. He said he didn't believe I could change, and he didn't believe I would change. I paused. He was wrong. I looked at him then, directly at him, and he was staring at me with something I couldn't quite read. Recognition, maybe, or shock. I'm not here to make this about me, I continued. I'm here because Sarah deserved better than she got. She deserved someone to believe that change was possible. She deserved someone to see past the addiction to the person who was drowning. And maybe she had that. Maybe her family did everything they could. But our system, our courts, our hospitals, our society, we don't treat addiction like the disease it is. We treat it like a moral failure. We look at people who are suffering and we decide whether they deserve compassion based on things that have nothing to do with their humanity. Their address, their last name, the color of their skin. Whether they've disappointed us before. My hands were gripping the edges of the podium. Judge Coleman, I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you. I remember what it felt like to be told I would never be anything more than my worst moment. I remember what it felt like to be seen as disposable. My voice cracked, just slightly. But I also need you to know something. You were wrong about me. And I think maybe the world was wrong about Sarah too. Because people can change. We do change. Every single day. People get clean, and they rebuild their lives. And they become parents, and counselors, and teachers, and artists, and 1,000 other things. But only if someone believes in them first. Only if someone sees them as worth saving. The church was absolutely silent. I'm so sorry for your loss, I said, and I meant it. I'm sorry Sarah didn't get to live long enough to find out who she could become. I'm sorry she didn't get to feel what it's like on the side of the darkness. And I'm sorry that we live in a world that makes it so hard for people to change. That judges them before they've had the chance to try. I stepped down from the podium. My legs were shaking. I walked back down that aisle, and I could feel every eye on me, but I didn't look back. I walked out into the bright October afternoon, and I sat on a bench across the street. And I cried for Sarah Coleman and for every person I had been able to save, and for the girl I'd been who almost not survived. I didn't know it yet, but the world was about to change. 10 minutes later, Judge Coleman walked out of the church, He stood there for a moment, looking around, and then he saw me. He crossed the street slowly, like a man who'd suddenly gotten old, and he sat down on the bench beside me. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, he said, "I remember you. I know. I was wrong," he said, and his voice was rough. "Not just about you, about a lot of things." I turned to look at him. His face was gray, etched with grief. "Sarah got arrested once," he said quietly, 3 years ago. "I pulled strings, got her into a program, got the charges dropped. I thought I was helping her. But what I was really doing was making sure no one saw what was happening, making sure it didn't reflect on me." He wiped his eyes. "I spent my whole career judging people, deciding who deserved a chance and who didn't. And the whole time, my daughter was drowning. And I couldn't see it because I was too busy protecting my reputation." "You loved her," I said. "Not enough." He shook his head. "Or not the right way. I loved the idea of her, the daughter I wanted her to be. But I didn't know how to love the person she actually was." We sat there together, two people who'd been on opposite sides of a courtroom, both broken by the same thing. "What you said in there," he finally continued, "about people being able to change. Do you really believe that?" I thought about Dorothy, about the women I'd met in prison, about the clients I worked with who came back again and again until one day they didn't, about Alina, and how she'd learned to trust me again. About myself. "Yes," I said, "I do. But only if we give them the chance. Only if we stop deciding who's worth saving and start seeing everyone as worth it." He nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can change," he said. "I'm 71 years old, and I've been the same person for so long." "That's what I thought too," I said. "But here's the thing about change. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments. In the choice to be honest instead of comfortable, to be kind instead of right, to see someone differently than you did before. Like you saw me today," he said. "You could have humiliated me up there, destroyed me, but you didn't. That's not who I am anymore." He stood up slowly, and he extended his hand. "Thank you," he said, "for speaking, for Sarah, for giving me something to think about." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, and in his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen in that courtroom: respect. Share this with someone who would understand. The funeral ended. People went back to their lives. But something had shifted, for me, and maybe for him too. A few weeks later, I got a letter. It was from Judge Coleman. He'd written to tell me that he'd retired from the bench, that he'd started volunteering at a recovery center, helping people navigate the legal system, that he wanted to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just wanted me to know. I didn't write back, but I kept the letter. Alina asked me about the funeral, about why I'd gone, about what I'd said. We were sitting in our living room, the one I'd saved for and earned, with books on the shelves and pictures on the walls and plants in the windows. A home, a real home, too. I went because I needed to, I told her. Because sometimes you have to face the people who hurt you and show them that they didn't win. Not by being cruel, but by being everything they said you couldn't be. "Are you still angry?" she asked. I thought about that. "No," I said, "I used to be. I used to be so angry I could barely breathe. But anger is heavy, baby, and I got tired of carrying it. So what do you feel now?" "Peace," I said. "Not the kind where everything is perfect. The kind where you know who you are, and you're okay with it. The kind where other people's opinions don't define you anymore." She leaned against me, and we sat there in the quiet. And I thought about all the years and all the choices and all the ways a life can break and rebuild itself into something different. Something stronger. I still work at the hospital. I still go to meetings. I still help people on the worst days of their lives and tell them the same thing Dorothy told me. You are more than this moment. You are more than your mistakes. Change is possible, but only if you believe in it first. Last month, I was invited to speak at a conference for judges and attorneys about addiction and the criminal justice system. I almost didn't go. But then I thought about Sarah, and about all the Sarahs who do untap to die if we change the way we see them. I gave my speech, I told my story. And when I finished, Judge Coleman was there. He'd come to hear me speak. We didn't talk much, just a nod, an acknowledgement. But it was enough. Stay with me until the end, it's worth it. Sometimes, I think about that day in the courtroom, when I was standing there in shackles, and he told me I would never change. I think about how right he was to see a person who was drowning, but how wrong he was to think that drowning was all I was. Because here's the truth, people can change, not easily, not without pain and work, and falling down and getting back up more times than you can count, but we can. I did, and every day I meet someone else who's in the middle of their own transformation, and I get to tell them what no one told me when I needed it most. I believe in you. I believe you can do this. I believe you are worth saving. Respect does not erase the past. It simply teaches us how to breathe again. And breathing real, full, deep breathing, that's the first step toward everything else. Truth does not shout. It simply waits to be heard. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, someone is finally ready to listen. If stories like this remind you what dignity feels like, subscribe. You belong here, and don't miss the next story. It is something truly unforgettable.